It would not be fair to record the adventures of Father Brown without admitting that he was once involved in a grave scandal. There still are persons, perhaps even of his own community, who would say that there was a sort of blot upon his name. It happened in a picturesque Mexican roadhouse, of rather loose repute, as appeared later, and to some it seemed that for once the priest had allowed a romantic streak in him and his sympathy for human weakness to lead him into loose and unorthodox action. The story in itself was a simple one, and perhaps the whole surprise of it consisted in its simplicity. Burning Troy began with Helen. This disgraceful story began with the beauty of Hypatia Potter. Americans have a great power which Europeans do not always appreciate, of creating institutions from below. That is, by popular initiative. Like every other good thing, it has its lighter aspects, one of which, as has been remarked by Mr. Wells and others, is that a person may become a public institution without becoming an official institution. A girl of great beauty or brilliancy will be a sort of uncrowned queen, even if she is not a film star or the original of a Gibson girl. Among those who had the fortune, or misfortune, to exist beautifully in public in this manner was a certain Hypatia Hart, who had passed through the preliminary stage of receiving florid compliments in society paragraphs of the local press, to the position of one who is actually interviewed by a real pressman. On war and peace and patriotism and prohibition and evolution and the Bible, she had made her pronouncements with a charming smile, and if none of them seemed very near to the real grounds of her own reputation, it was almost equally hard to say what the grounds of her reputation really were. Beauty, and being the daughter of a rich man, are things not rare in her country. But to these she added whatever it is that attracts the wandering eye of journalism. Next to none of her admirers had ever seen her, or even hoped to do so, and none of them could possibly derive any sordid benefit from her father's wealth. It was simply a sort of popular romance, the modern substitute for mythology, and it laid the first foundations of the more turgid and tempestuous sort of romance into which she was to figure later on, and in which many held that the reputation of Father Brown, as well as of others, had been blown to rags. It was accepted, sometimes romantically, sometimes resignedly, by those whom American satire has named the Sob Sisters, that she had already married a very worthy and respectable businessman of the name of Potter. It was even possible to regard her for a moment as Mrs. Potter, on the universal understanding that her husband was only the husband of Mrs. Potter.